Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Child Anxiety Fact Podcast. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I'm the owner of Child Anxiety Support, a membership for parents of anxious kids. I have my master's in clinical counseling and additional postgraduate training in child anxiety disorders, including exposure and response prevention and the Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions program, or SPACE program, which was designed by Dr. Ellie Lebowitz of the Yale Child Study Center. I'm also certified in infant-toddler mental health. FACT stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and each week I'll be answering your questions about childhood and teen anxiety. Let's get started. This week's question has kind of a short answer, but it's a really good question. I wanted to bring it to the podcast anyway. And the short version of the question is, what if I don't mind being stuck in the parenting pitfalls? And I like that question so much because it's complicated. The person who asked this actually asked, I'm going to quote the whole thing, I have been listening to your podcast and took your parenting pitfalls quiz and I scored high. I know that my child has anxiety, but I don't have an issue with helping him. You say on your podcast that you should follow your instincts, and I was an anxious little girl and my mother never helped me, and I don't want to do that to my son. If I don't have a problem with helping and it seems to help, why is this an issue? What a great question. And I do think we need to follow our instincts. But I also think it's important to stop and interrogate those instincts. What I mean is to make sure that we're not projecting onto our kids. That's tough. And that's what I mean about anxiety work being deep work. So what is the problem with continuing to fall into those parenting pitfalls? What's the problem if we don't have a problem? Well, the problem is our children are meant to outgrow us. Our children are meant to learn to rely on themselves. The Parenting Pitfalls quiz, which you can get to right on my website, childanxietysupport.com, and up at the top, it will say there's the Parenting Pitfalls quiz, is based on the Family Accommodation Scale, which is an evidence-based scale used to measure anxiety accommodations in families. And anxiety accommodations are what I call pitfalls. They're the things that we do as parents for our anxious children that get our anxious kids stuck. And again, there is a ton of research about this. And we do those things not because we're uncaring parents, obviously. It's because we're such caring parents. And that's what makes them so sticky. We do them because we're caring. And unfortunately, those things keep our kids stuck. My answer to that question, if I don't have a problem with helping and it seems to help, why is this an issue? Is it's an issue because it is keeping your child stuck in anxiety. It's not just about what we're willing to do. It's about what is helping our child. And that being stuck in the pitfalls is not helping our child. One of the things I learned early on in my career working with kids, which is 30-plus year career now, is that it is extremely important that we have a developmental context to our parenting decisions. We need to understand what is typical so that our expectations will be realistic. When I say expectations, I mean things like understanding that a 2-year-old can't be left alone in a bath, but also understanding that an 8-year-old needs to be able to separate from their parent. An 8-year-old who is struggling to separate from a parent is not bad, and they sure don't have bad parents. They just need help. I like to think of development as progress. We're moving forward, and then we have a general idea of where kids ought to be. And if they're not there, then we need to figure out how to help get them there. So an 8-year-old who is not separating from their parents, that's telling us they just need help. It's a reasonable expectation developmentally for a neurotypical child to be able to separate from their parent. I mean, we need to step back and see what else might be going on. If we start with the belief that our children can separate, but may need help, that opens us up to figuring out the help. So instead of just throwing up our hands and saying, they can't do it, we can say, how can I help them get towards doing it? How can I help them along their way to doing it? This is different than saying they should do it and we need to make them. I want to be so clear about that. We're saying, hey, I think this is appropriate for them, and I need to figure out how to help them grow towards it. This also means that we're thinking of this all as a process with steps and a trajectory and many little goals along the way. It's not pass fail. It's a journey, right? When there is reluctance, either on a parent's part or a child's part, I think it helps to slow things way down. Let's figure out what's getting in the way and figure out how to address those obstacles, whatever they are. Going back to the question where the parent isn't wanting to step out of the parenting pitfalls, I'm seeing the parent's obstacles, but that doesn't mean there aren't some for the child too. Remember, parenting is a relationship and it's shaped by the participants in the relationship, which means that even if the mom is saying, it's me, it's all me, I like helping, I want to help, I'm not going to assume that it is in fact all hers. I'm going to assume that this is in the relationship as well. Let's get back to focusing on the parents. Let's talk about reluctant parents in the anxious relationship. Now, I see lots of reluctant parents, and I think sometimes my job is it's less about trying to shove people through a program and more about being a step and a help along the way as people figure it out, a tool they can use in moving to the next stage of their parenting. The fact that this person is listening to my podcast tells me that she is indeed thinking about change. She's thinking about child anxiety, and she's considering ways to help her child. Per her own words, she's not ready to change yet, but that doesn't mean that she's not going to be ready to change, that she's not in the process of changing already. Reluctance on the part of parents can happen for quite a few reasons, and often these reasons are overlapping. And I'm going to share 3 of the most common that I see. And the first is parents who were themselves anxious as kids and who didn't feel well supported as kids, and so are hypersensitive to their own children's distress. Now, I've said before that my population of parents tend to be gentle parents, respectful parents, conscious parents, parents who are trying to really be there for their kids. And many of us come to this style of parenting because we want to do things differently than our own parents did. We forget, though, that our children are already growing up in a more supportive context. And so our children's distress does not look like our own childhood distress. The mom who wrote me for this podcast says her mom didn't help her, but she does help her son, which means she can lovingly pull back on that help, especially if she explains to her son what's happening and is open with him. And that's part of the program. That's part of the child anxiety support program, is that you do inform your kids. That doesn't look the same as a parent who's just not helping, right? So the parent is going to pull back on help, but they're going to do it in a totally different way and in the context of a totally different relationship. So that addresses that first kind of reluctance. The second most common reason a parent might be reluctant is they have an intense kid. This is a child whose anxiety is big and whose behavior might be even bigger. A child who gets very upset, sometimes very disruptive, sometimes really hard on themselves in ways that can feel scary. And the parents are trying to figure out how to manage all of that. And often they are doing this by accommodating the anxiety. They're trying to avoid those behaviors or avoid those big, scary feelings. Now, that kind of reluctance takes care for sure, but it's certainly not insurmountable, not at all. And again, this is a lot of the parents who reach out to me. They have tried things and they haven't worked because their kid's behavior has gotten so big that the family just feels frozen in place. What helps with this is having a structured, clear plan and extra support. These make a huge difference. Man, I get it. I get why those parents are reluctant when they know that pulling back on the pitfalls, it's going to mean meltdowns. And the third most common reason parents are reluctant is a little bit of both. The parents are sensitive and intense. They are really feeling their child's struggle, and their child is sensitive and intense and is really letting that struggle be known. The anxiety is strong for both the parent and the child. And that is the number one most common reason people reach out to me, is that it's both. That's the parent most likely to contact me about the program. It's both. They are very worried about their child. and their child is kind of worrisome. And yes, that's difficult, and it might take time before that parent is really motivated to change, and that's fine. If those parents aren't ready to do the whole program, they certainly can still benefit by joining it and starting to explore. I actually have a course in child anxiety support that's all about change, and it honors this. It explains that we need to come to change on our own time and in our own way and on our own terms. Understanding that can help us as we move forward, understanding how change looks. We can learn about anxiety. We can spend our time in the CBT family part of the course, just kind of browsing the activities there and seeing if any of them interest us or might interest our child. We can read through Strong Kids, Strong Families without doing anything and just let ourselves feel reluctant and defensive. That's fine. That's part of getting ready to change. And those people who do that, I say, come on in, talk it out with me, argue with me. Play around with how approaching it could look. Let yourself be resistant and explore the resistance. There's lots of times to stop and observe what's happening in this new understanding of what might be going on. The thing about parenting an anxious child is that it takes a paradigm shift to start addressing the anxiety. Sometimes we can't do things differently until we have that shift. And sometimes we start doing things differently, and that pulls us into the shift. It's not better to do it one way or the other. People should start wherever they are, even if it's in a place where they're saying, I don't actually want to start at all yet. Basically, what I'm saying is that growth is not and should not necessarily be a straight line, not for you and not for your child. And here I want to speak directly to that mom who wrote me, and I want to say to her, I am so glad that you're listening and that you reached out. I know you care deeply about your son and you're working hard to provide for him in a way that you were not provided for. That's impressive. And if you ever want some support as you figure out next steps, please let me know because I'm here for you. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have a question you would like me to answer on the show, please go to childanxietysupport.com/FAQ. And if you'd like to learn more about the Child Anxiety Support membership, please go to childanxietysupport.com. The membership offers courses, live events, and community to help you design a personalized program to free your family from the trap of child anxiety. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with any friends or family who you think might find it helpful. You can get more of my child anxiety content over at Instagram, where I'm Dawn Friedman, MSED, or on Facebook at the Child Anxiety Support page. Thanks again, and have a great week.